Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and to hear my diversity plan. So let's dive right in. So today I'm going to cover my diversity plan for our school, Sachs High School, here in Calhoun County, Alabama. Okay, so the reason that a diversity plan is necessary is because that we have several subgroups in our school who are underachieving and have low test scores comparative to their peers. There are several potential factors of this underachievement. Among those are race and ethnic background, poverty as measured by the free and reduced meal eligibility, and neurodiversity. And we are going to look a little deeper at these charts in a few slides. So first, let's focus on race and ethnic background. Despite over 52% of our student population being non-Caucasian, there are only 6.41% of our teachers who are non-Caucasian. We really should work toward recruiting, hiring, and retaining teachers, administrators, and staff of color, and should also work to increase cultural awareness of all teachers, administrators, and staff who are already hired at our school. According to Dr. Ruby K. Payne, American educator and author, the greatest free resource available to schools is the role modeling provided by teachers, administrators, and staff. Students really need to have role models who are the same race and ethnicity as they are. You can tell quickly just by looking at these demographics here between students and teachers how vastly different they are. The blue represents our Caucasian students, and then teachers, and the orange represents our African American students, and then teachers. And you can't even really tell the green or yellow of our American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population because it is so small. So looking at this graph here of our economically disadvantaged students, again, these are students who live in poverty, and this is determined by those who are eligible for free and reduced meals. The blue in this circle graph here represents those students who live in poverty. Over 63% of our students are economically disadvantaged. This is the majority. Obviously, living in poverty has a significant impact on a student's education. And then next, neurodiversity. We have 12.15% of our student population who are considered neurodiverse, or students who have disabilities. Those who are neurodiverse often struggle with test taking, especially if their typical accommodations, according to their IEPs, are limited in any way. So now I'd like to dive in a little bit to proficiency by subject. This is the most recent data for 2021. This came from the Alabama Department of Education report card for Sachs High School. And I do want to make sure that you notice the disclaimer at the bottom of the screen here. The data may be slightly skewed as Caucasian, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, and American Indian Alaska Native students are all lumped together into one category for some reason, instead of each having their own separate categories on many standardized testing data, or much of the data. Also, there are some tests that have the Asian student population lumped into that same group as well. So let's look at each subject individually. First, let's look at English language arts. The blue on this chart represents the percentage of our students who are considered proficient in English language arts. The orange are those who are not proficient. So in English language arts, only 14.93% of our student population are considered proficient. If you look at the breakdown on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that 100% of our Asian population are considered proficient. Only 6.67% of our African American population are considered proficient in ELA. 28.57% of our white population are considered proficient. That's a huge gap between our African American and white students. Our Hispanic and Latino population, there are 50% of those students who are considered proficient in English language arts. To me, this seems really impressive considering that many of our Hispanic and Latino students come from a Spanish-speaking background where English is actually their second language. So that is quite impressive. Again, that is a huge difference, though, between our Hispanic Latino students and our white students, and our Hispanic Latino students and our African American students. Only 12.5% of our students with disabilities are considered proficient in English language arts, and only 16.28% of our economically disadvantaged students are considered proficient in English language arts. Similarly, you can see the breakdown here on the right-hand side of the screen in math proficiency. 100% of the Asian population. Of students, 2.22% of our African American student population are considered proficient. That is very low, especially when you consider that 22.73% of our white population are proficient and 25% of our Hispanic and Latino population are proficient in math. Again, those are really huge gaps that need to be addressed. 0% of our students with disabilities are proficient in math. Again, something else that needs to really be addressed. And then only 11.63% of our economically disadvantaged students are considered proficient in math. Now let's look at the science breakdown. Again, 100% of our Asian student population are considered proficient. 15.56% of our African American population are considered proficient in science. 18.18% of our white student population are considered proficient. 0% of our Hispanic and Latino population are considered proficient in science, as well as 0% of our students with disabilities. Again, that's a major issue. We need to look at the data and try to figure out why we have 0% of any of our subgroups considered proficient in any academic area. And then only 16.28% of our economically disadvantaged students are considered proficient in science. These gaps aren't that big when you're looking at our African American, white, and economically disadvantaged students. However, when you take into consideration that we have 100% of our Asian students, yet only 0% of our Hispanic Latino students and students with disabilities, that is a real issue that we need to dive into. Now we've looked at some of the issues and some of the problems. Let's focus on now ways to address these problems, ways to bridge these gaps between subgroups. One way I would like to propose is to use our acceleration enrichment period, that 30-minute period every day, to focus on aiding our underachieving groups of students. There are many ways we could help. One would be to teach test-taking skills, content preparation and practice, and ways to overcome test anxiety. There are many students I've come to realize who are extremely intelligent, do very well in class, and then when it comes to standardized testing, they get so anxious and nervous that all of that preparation just goes out the window. It's like all of the knowledge just poofs out of their mind. So ways to overcome test anxiety could really help those students. Excuse me. Students can also be split up into smaller groups by utilizing the paraprofessionals available during that time to help teach these students remedial skills that they may need help with. Paraprofessionals would need to have the appropriate training and could co-plan, so to say, with other teachers. A great way to do this remotely so that it's not adding so much more onto our teachers and paraprofessionals' plates is by adding the parapros to Google Classroom and communicating that way. Excuse me. Of course, if we did something like this, we would have to make sure to assign duties based on the paraprofessionals' own strengths as well. If they have a strong background in math, they would need to be remediating students in math. And so on and so forth with ELA or science or any area. So another way that we could potentially bridge these gaps would be encouraging more parental involvement and establishing and fostering good relationships between parents and teachers and staff, as well as between students and teachers and staff. One way we could do this is to have an open house at least once per 9 weeks where all teachers would be present to discuss any concerns the parents may have, or any concerns the teacher may have, or to simply just praise the students to their parents for how well they're doing. I've noticed that this tends to be a really popular thing to do in elementary schools and middle schools. However, when it comes to the high school grades, it just kind of drops off, and you don't see this as often at the high school level. However, it could still be very beneficial for our teachers and staff, as well as the parents and the students, I feel like, to establish those relationships and to try to get the parents to be more involved. So another way that we could potentially bridge these gaps is to keep in mind Maslow overbloom. I know we hear this all the time in the world of education, but it is very true that a student's basic needs must be met first before their educational needs can be met. There are many ways that we could go about trying to make sure that students' basic needs are met. One would be to establish a share closet. This would need to be in a discreet but easily accessible area and include all sorts of different types of basic necessities, toiletries, food, snacks, school supplies, that sort of thing. Another way would be to make sure each student has a technological device in their hands that they are able to take home to use for homework and in case we were to go virtual again. A way that we could work toward this goal is to set up a device drive similar to a food drive and have people donate the old devices they have that still work. We could also take up monetary donations, but the key would be to not charge a fee for students to be able to use these devices. I believe petitioning the government to offer a free wireless internet voucher to all students and families who meet income eligibility requirements would also be a great idea. This is similar to something that was done at the onset of COVID-19. So it's been done before, so we know that it can be done again. We could also host seasonal free yard sales and monthly food drives and food giveaways. One way to bridge these gaps for our neurodiverse students would be to make sure they are allowed all accommodations that they need for standardized testing, as outlined in their IEPs. Excuse me. This could be giving them extended time, having the directions or questions read out loud, allowing them to test away from other students, among many, many other accommodations that may be outlined in those IEPs. And I know it may not be possible, but if there were any way to create a differentiated type of test for these students, that would help them tremendously. So a couple of final thoughts. In this diversity plan, there were many potential factors for the underachievement of subgroups on tests that have been addressed. These include race and ethnic background, poverty, and being neurodiverse. If we put even just a few of the proposed solutions into action, I suspect that we will see steady increases in test scores in each of these subgroups over the next several school years. Again, I would like to thank you all for coming out and for listening to this presentation. I know that everybody is very busy and has a lot on their plates already, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.